Everybody, welcome into a new edition of the Patriots Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network and on Patriots Press Pass. I'm Evan Lazar, joined as always by Alex Barth, and we already have a lot of people angry in the comments. We already have a lot of people going crazy about the breaking news. The Patriots, within the last hour, trading starting right guard Shaq Mason to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a 2022 fifth-round draft choice. It frees up a little bit over $6 million in salary cap space for the Patriots. And at this point, it's getting harder and harder to justify some of these moves, to explain some of these moves to all of you. And I think most importantly, the Patriots are taking on water here, right? I mean, they already came into this offseason with quite a few holes to plug. Now you look at it and you see J.C. Jackson's gone. Now they have multiple spots to fill on the offensive line. We went into this offseason thinking there was maybe one hole to fill on the offensive line, and potentially a guard spot or a tackle spot, depending on how they felt about Michael Onwenu and where his future held. They let Ted Karras get away. They still have no idea. There's a right tackle situation going on that they haven't figured out yet. And as much as I want to sit here and be patient and say there's still another shoe to drop, because you don't free up cap space like this for no reason. Clearly, they're freeing up the space from Mason to go and do something with it. But I don't know, Alex. I'm having a difficult time here. Even me, who is Mr. Optimism when it comes to the Patriots most of the time, this is a positive show. Most of the time when it comes to the Patriots, it is difficult to continue to explain away not only getting rid of these players and letting these players move on, but also justifying the return that they're getting for a lot of these players is difficult to stomach as well.
Yeah, look, the idea of trading Shaq Mason in general, isn't
Right.
horrible. It would have been a lot easier to swallow if they kept Ted Karras, but that they obviously didn't.
Right.
But I look at it, they made a comparable trade with the same team in Logan Mankins. Now, here's the difference. Logan Mankins was 32, right? 32. Let me make sure I have that right. Logan Mankins was 32. He might have been 30. No, yeah, he was 32. Logan Mankins was 32, and he wanted a new deal. He was holding out. Shaq Mason's 29 and under contract for 2 more years. They got a 4th-round pick and a contributing caliber player when they traded Logan Mankins. They got a 4th-round pick, and they got Tim Wright. They got a 5th-round pick, full stop, for Shaq Mason. That's not enough. That's not enough of a return. And like you said, offensive line is in need now, right? The right tackle spot, we still don't know. They could bring Trent Brown back. We don't know. Michael Onwenu's going to fill one guard spot. They're going to have to fill the other. And then let's not forget left tackle next year, Isaiah Wynn. His contract is going to be expiring. They're going to need to add another tackle next year. That's not what you do. That's not what you do when you have a young quarterback back there.
Right.
And I spent all of last year, right, talking about the 4-year window. This is not what teams in the second year of the 4-year window, the young quarterback, do. It's backwards, right? They should be on the other end of deals like this. This is a team that is just trying to get, like, this kind of deal is a team that's just trying to get younger and add draft capital. The Patriots got significantly younger last year with that draft. So this is, again, everything is about building around Mac Jones. You have him on this affordable deal. The idea is you bring back players in premium positions you maybe pay a little bit more for than you would otherwise. That would have been J.C. Jackson. They didn't do it. Well, you at least got to protect the kid. Now they've lost 3 starters on the offensive line. It is getting tough. I said it at the end of the show yesterday, and I'll say it again. We got a long way to go. This is day 2 of free agency. The new league year hasn't even begun.
Right.
There's a lot of free agents left to sign. There still is the draft, but they are now further away than they were when we were on here yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they got closer today. Mack Wilson is an interesting acquisition, but I don't feel like they're closer to that goal today than they were yesterday. I feel like they're further away. Doesn't mean they can't get there, but I can't get behind this trade. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Not for that return.
The other thing I would say too is a couple people have pointed this out in the chat and they're spot on. The Patriots had other avenues to free up the same amount of cap space that they just freed up with this Shaq Mason trade. And what this points to me is a reluctance either on Robert Kraft's part to pay the money up front, or on Bill Belichick's part to borrow from future years against the cap, to use some of the cap tools at their disposal to free up more space. So they could have, for example, restructured Matthew Judon's contract and in turn salary into signing bonus and freed up the same $6 million that they just freed up with Shaq Mason by making that move. They could have extended Hunter Henry for another season and tacked on another year onto his contract and freed up similar cap space. I think all of us would have been fine if we came on today and said that the Patriots have traded Nelson Aguilar for a 5th round pick. We'd all be fine with it, right? Because go ahead and use that cap space someplace else on another wide receiver that fits better. The Patriots doing this with Shaq Mason tells me that the only explanation for it from that perspective is that maybe they didn't think Shaq had as good of a year last year as we all did, or PFF did, or all of us media or fans thought he did. And they saw the player starting to deteriorate. And they saw the player starting to be, oh, let's get out of this a year early instead of a year too late. The problem is that they are in the one door and out the other with that strategy, right? Because certain guys, just earlier today, we were going to talk about it off the top of the show until this happened. They re-signed James White. And then the other day, they re-signed Devin McCourty. And they re-signed Matthew Slater. And they continue to roster these veteran players. But a 29-year-old Shaq Mason is a step too far. He's the guy that's the odd man out. And I also put on top of this what happened yesterday with Ted Karras, which they absolutely butchered that situation too. With Karras, they offered him 3 for $15 right around the combine, which also coincided with the time the team started calling about Shaq Mason's availability, I think those things were very much connected. Then they get to free agency or the legal tampering period, and they drop their offer to Ted Karras by $2 million. They go from 3 from 15 max value to 3 for 13, and he looks at the Cincinnati Bengals and says, I'm going to go protect Joe Burrow. See you later. Right? So they end up losing Ted Karras and Shaq Mason. And they offered Ted Karras a legitimate deal. That 3 for 15 was a legitimate offer. He only got 3 for 18 from Cincinnati. So that's a real money offer. And my guess is that Karras was probably the plan. Right? They probably wanted to bring back Karras, and they were going to free up money by trading Shaq and keeping Karras and putting on Wenu at guard. And this whole house of cards came crashing down on them a little bit on the offensive line. So then I come back to, then why pull the trigger on the Shaq trade? Like if that was the plan,
right?
Then why continue to just pull out of the Shaq trade then and just go a different direction?
So, yeah, I'd be really, I was going to say it there and you kind of hit on it at the end. I'd be really interested to see the timeline in all of this.
Right.
Because, again, if they bring Karras back, I don't think this is as jarring. Again, the return's not quite what it should be. By the way, nobody is ever allowed again to say Bill Belichick hates Tom Brady. If he really hated Tom Brady, he would have gifted him a top 5 guard in the league. So they're fine. Those two are fine, clearly. The return's still a little low, but like if they kept Karras, it's like, all right, they're freeing up some cap. They did have like an 80 pick gap in the draft. They didn't have a 5th round pick. They traded that for Trent Brown last year. So it's like, okay, like I kind of see it. It's not my favorite move.
Right.
But again, you lose Karras, Mason becomes that much more valuable. It gets a lot weirder, right? And the flip side of that is true too, by the way. If they'd gotten like a second for Mason, all right, well, you need 2 guards, but now you have an extra top 50 pick.
Right.
That, you draft a guard there. They've done that plenty of times. So it's the entire situation that's weird. It's like a perfect storm of things just not going their way that makes this such a weird deal.
So the other thing I would say too is we talked about this yesterday with JC Jackson. We've all been clamoring for the Patriots to get that number 1 wide receiver, to get that top dog in their offense. And because they lost JC Jackson in free agency yesterday, it now feels like corner is a more immediate need on this team than wide receiver. And now they've made interior offensive line a major need for them, or however they want to shake it up. There's going to be a big hole on the offensive line to fill. And the absolute worst thing that they could possibly do is overreact to that and draft a guard at 21. Like, if they draft a guard at 21, that is such a terrible use of that asset. Like, this is a premium asset, the 21st overall pick. That's a top 25 selection in a deep draft. That's a good pick. And to use that on a guard instead of using it on a receiver or using it on a pass rusher or a linebacker that can also rush the passer or a corner, and going away from the premium spots of that draft choice, that would be a huge miscalculation. So they haven't done that yet, so let's not freak out about it, right? But the one thing I would definitely say is, like, all these tweets and stuff like that. Oh, well, what now? They could potentially take a guard. What about Zion Johnson? If they take Zion Johnson at 21, I don't care how good of a player he is. That is a terrible usage of asset allocation, right? It just doesn't. Guards at 21 do not give you value, and that's a terrible thing.
So, but I, to kind of piggyback off that point, I don't disagree about what you're saying with the 21st pick. I think now it's even more likely they're going to trade down, for what it's worth. I think you're going to see something like the trade 2020, the trade they did with Kyle Duggar, where they moved down, they move out of the first for a second and third, you pick up 2 extra top 60 picks, or top 90 picks. That makes a ton of sense right now. But I'll say this, and you kind of hinted at it. What we talked about yesterday, right? Wide receiver is a need, but there's 2 kinds of needs. There's luxury needs, and then there's just needs, right? A luxury need is, you have players at the position, you can get better. You have players at the position. A need is, you're looking at the depth chart and it's blank. Or you have no NFL caliber players at that position, right? So wide receiver is a luxury need. It's probably as borderline as you're going to get, but Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers, those are NFL players across the board. Wasn't that case in 2020? Was not the case in 2020. In 2021, they had NFL wide receivers across the board. They also have Hunter Henry. They brought James White back today, which I will say was a very good and important move. At tackle, right tackle right now, pending Trent Brown, that's an immediate need. That's not a luxury need. That's an immediate need. Right. They may view left tackle as an immediate need. They like to stay a year ahead of that. If they know they're not going to bring Isaiah
Wynn back,
the
luxury right now, Alex, to stay a year ahead of things.
But they may see it. I'm telling you, you're right. They may see it that way. Just for the point, they may see it that way. That's an immediate need. Guard is now an immediate need. One spot, guard, because you have Michael Onwenu.
Right.
Or if you want to move him to tackle, then 2 guards are immediate needs. Inside linebacker, I think even with today's trade, is still an immediate need. That can be erased by bringing back Bentley or Hightower, but that is still an immediate need. And obviously, cornerback is an immediate need. So we've now added another position before you can get to, you're going to rank the immediate needs and the luxury needs. Wide receivers at the top of the list of luxury needs, clearly top of that list. But you can't get to that list until you finish off the immediate needs. And there's now another position on that first list in guard. That doesn't mean they need to spend the 21st overall pick to address it. But yesterday wasn't really a need at all. I thought they were going to be okay. They still had Mason, Onwenu, you're fine. Maybe you draft somebody late as a potential successor. Now, you could argue they need a guard more than a wide receiver.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that now they have put themselves in a position where they can convince themselves to take a guard at 21 over Chris Olave, and I'm going to lose my freaking mind, right? Because they can take a guard on day 2. They can put James Ferentz in at guard for all I care. They will be better off. I know everybody wants to sit here and say that, protection matters, all these things matter. The Patriots will figure it out in terms of protecting Mac Jones. I truly believe that. And we'll get to this next shoe to drop here in a second. There is a next shoe to drop. They're freeing up cap space to do something. Okay. And Andrew Callahan of the Herald, who broke the news that the Patriots were trading Shaq Mason, tweeted out a little bit after he broke that news that the Patriots have also kicked around the idea of trading for Cowboys right tackle La'el Collins, who is one of the best right tackles in football and is an absolute stud. He's a really good football player. The Cowboys have cap issues as well. They're trying to get out of his contract. So there is, I think, the best case scenario here for the offensive line. Now, I think the other shoe that could potentially drop is, as I tweeted out earlier, the Patriots are still very active in the wide receiver market. Basically, the entire wide receiver market is waiting for Allen Robinson to make a decision. And it is a
As
little
they
bit
should.
it is a little bit peculiar that the Patriots all of a sudden just traded their starting guard to free up $6.5 million in cap space when they're linked to all these wide receivers in free agency. So maybe something could happen there. But let's start with Collins because that's the one solidified report that we have in terms of a name. And again, one of the best right tackles in football, somebody that the Cowboys are looking to move on from or potentially release. So I don't think that you're going to have to trade a premium pick to get La'el Collins. If the offensive line next year is win at tackle, a guard from the draft, Andrews Onwenu on the interior, and then La'el Collins at right tackle, that is a line that I can get behind. Like, I think the Patriots would have a very good to above average offensive line with that group and would mitigate this thing a little bit of Shaq Mason being dealt here. The return on Shaq Mason's not good no matter which way you slice it, but if they can get La'el Collins for a day 3 pick from the Cowboys, then it obviously makes things feel a little bit better.
I guess. And then that does, because he's under contract multiple years, right?
Collins? I believe so.
So then they answer that question at right. Like they can't, here's my thing. You can't have a 1-year right tackle. I don't think their right tackle this year can be gone a 1-year deal because then you're essentially looking to replace both tackles next year. Are you pulling up the contract or am I?
I am. Yeah. So he signed a 5-year, $50 million deal in, it looks like it kicks in and he's a free agent in 2025. So currently his yearly cash, just for reference, is $10 million this year. So his cap hit would be $10 million, maybe a little bit more based off of playing time incentives and stuff like that for his new team this year. So that would explain Miguel Pat's cap, I think, has the Patriots now at around 14 million in cap space after trading Shaq Mason. So that kind of, those cap numbers do line up.
Yeah. So if it's essentially La'el Collins for Shaq Mason, you're good with that.
I'm 100% good with that. Younger player. I actually think that La'el Collins at this point in time is probably a better player than Shaq Mason. Actually, they're around the same age, which is kind of crazy. I felt like La'el Collins was younger than
he'll turn 29 this summer.
Yeah, so they're around the same age. He is, I think, at this stage, a better player than Shaq. But it's most importantly, I would say, a premium position right tackle instead of being a guard. And you also have a guy in Mike Onwenu who played right guard in college at Michigan, is probably especially the way the Patriots like to run things, is a right guard in New England. So in a lot of ways, I think I could see them thinking that their right guard is here in Mike Onwenu, right tackle La'el Collins. That's a really legitimate right side. But, I mean, that's as good of a right side as you can get.
Can they realistically get La'el Collins for less than they just got for right? Like they shouldn't overextend themselves. If you traded Shaq Mason for a 5th and then you give up like a 3rd for La'el Collins, it's not worth the whatever. That would be more than a 60 pick. That'd be closer to an 80 pick gap. That's not worth it. So what's Collins ultimately like? I have no idea what his market is. What's Collins ultimately worth?
I don't think. Well, so this is one of those situations where the indication is that the Cowboys are going to cut La'el Collins if they can't find a trade partner. So if that's the case, because he does have an out in his contract this year for Dallas that carries $14 million in dead cap, so they can get out of his contract this year. So if that's the indication, just like we saw with Amari Cooper, once teams know that you're going to release them anyways, you're throwing a pick at them just to get the deal through so that you don't have to compete in free agency for his services, right? So that's the thing, is that La'el Collins at 5 for $50, $10 million in cash this year, that is a fantastic deal for the team that makes that trade, because if he's just an unrestricted free agent in this market, La'el Collins is getting a lot more than that on the open market as a free agent. So it's a decent deal in terms of what you're getting for the player. That's really the only thing that I can convince myself into on terms of the offensive line. Obviously, we all want Allen Robinson. If that happens, then I think that we can all stomach this a little bit more too. But if you just want to go off of what we know is that they do have some interest in La'el Collins, I'm all for it.
Yeah, again, it's, we got to see the return. They in those situations, they generally wait for the player to get cut because they'd rather have him under they structure their deals a very certain way, right?
Yeah.
So they'd rather wait. And it is worth noting, Leo Collins, like anybody who got cut, who is it today? Janoris Jenkins, Miles Jack, those guys don't count against the comp pick formula. And that's going to matter. That's going to matter. If you have two players who are close in ability, and one guy is coming off an expiring contract and the other guy was cut, they're going to try to get the guy who was cut. They're going to value that guy more because he doesn't hurt their comp pick situation. And they're going to be due comp picks. JC Jackson should be the top comp pick in the 2023 draft. Now, some of it, I believe, is based on money, right? Who knows with what Jacksonville's doing. The Cardinals will probably end up getting like a second for Christian Kirk because of how much money Jacksonville freaking paid that guy. But
not possible, but
that's a third. I know it's not. I was embellishing for effect.
Yes.
I would think Ted Karras is a comp pick player, probably 6th or 7th round.
Yeah. So it's all about what's called CFAs, right? Which is certified free agents, guys that make a certain amount of money qualify for the comp pick formula. And the comp pick formula is not as simple as the Patriots get a third for JC Jackson no matter what. It's talent in and talent out. So if you sign a guy comparable to JC Jackson, then they cancel each other out. So that's what you're talking about now with the comp picks. And I agree that that's going to be a factor.
Yeah. And so just to finish that, because you have explained it, I've had people ask me about this all day because I tweeted about it. So yes, if you sign a player comparable to JC Jackson, the thirds cancel out. That only applies to guys who are coming off expiring deals.
Correct.
Somebody like Miles Jack, who was cut. Somebody like Bobby Wagner, who was cut. If La'el Collins gets cut, they don't factor into that. So
right. So La'el Collins getting traded or cut to the Patriots wouldn't factor into that. If the Patriots were to make a move for a wide receiver or a corner or something like that in the trade market, that also wouldn't qualify. If there's a player that was released recently that you saw, not Jarvis Landry, they're not in on Jarvis Landry, but anybody else.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, honestly.
Who was released or something like that recently. You can look at that and then say, okay, that could potentially be an option. And this kind of segues us. I know people are mad about Shaq Mason. We just went for 20 minutes on it. I did want to talk about some other things, and this is one of them. The Mack Wilson trade, the Chase Winovich for Mack Wilson swap. I was told the Patriots were in on Josie Jewell, who signed with the Broncos or re-upped with the Broncos shortly after the Mack Wilson deal. And although Josie Jewell's contract wouldn't cancel out somebody like JC Jackson's, it might flirt with somebody like Ted Karras, right? And I think that the Patriots looked at it and said, instead of giving somebody like Josie Jewell 2 years, $12 million, we can pay a fraction of the cost for Mack Wilson and do it via trade so we don't have to worry about the comp pick formula, right? So these are the types of moves that if you're a Patriots fan and you want to try to predict the next move that Bill Belichick is going to make, I definitely think the next move is going to be something that involves a player that was either recently released or is available via trade, because I don't think that these free agents necessarily are where they want to go right now in this market. The wide receiver market is absolutely bonkers. I mean, Christian Kirk and the Jaguars just broke the game, right? Like, let's press restart, let's blow on the cartridge and try again, because that's exactly what happened with Christian Kirk. He gets $17-18 million a year. Now Allen Robinson's still not signed because he's sitting there with his agent, and his agent is saying, if Kirk's getting 18, my guy's 22, right? Like, that's our starting point. So that's the situation with the wide receiver market, and that's a difficult one to do as well, because the Patriots, I don't think, are going to pay Allen Robinson $20 million a year. So look for those trades, look for those cuts. We can talk about this Mack Wilson trade now as well, and then we'll circle back to Shaq Mason and give some closing thoughts at the end.
Yeah, so in regards to Josie Jewell or Mack Wilson, I'm actually okay with them going the way they did. I don't think Josie Jewell, if it was a guy like Bobby Wagner they were in on, I think Miles Jack would be a home run signing. I don't know if they're in on him or not. Like, then I might feel more strongly about it. To me, Jewell's an okay player, a fine player. He was hurt. He didn't really play last year, only played 2 games, significant shoulder injury. You're going to have to commit to him for multiple years. You're probably going to have to overpay him. I don't know that he's proven, right? I don't know that he's that guy. Mack Wilson, they've done this before. They've taken underperforming linebackers who are probably not in a system fit, brought them in and turned them into players. Kyle Van Noy's the shining example. They've done it on a lower level too with guys like Marquise Flowers, guys like Akeem Ayers, right? They do this. So he's on the last year of his rookie deal. For 1 year, you see what he is. Realistically, either way, it's not enough. Wilson or Jewell, you're going to have to keep adding. I think signing Jewell would have been overextended, and they had to trade Winovich anyway. Realistically, he was not hanging around. His value wasn't tremendous. Like a 5th round pick is what I thought you were getting for Winovich. Forget Shaq Mason, right? So to get a player, and Wilson was a 5th round pick 3 years ago, and they do kind of look at that in terms of value. But I actually think that's the better move of the two. I really do. I'm not as high on Mack Wilson. Like you were texting me earlier, you were surprised, former Alabama national champion.
Right.
The thing I remember, and I can't say I've watched a ton of Mack Wilson in the NFL, but I know that this is kind of carried over to his pro career. But the thing I remember about Mack Wilson, Alabama, when he's on. He's an Alabama middle linebacker, like you'd expect.
Right.
He's a player. He just wasn't as consistent as some of the other guys you've seen come through that program. There were games where he just didn't seem to know what he was looking at, right? And that worries me because this defense needs consistency after the way last year ended. You want somebody reliable in there. Like that feels like a huge thing right now. So let's see what role they have for Wilson. If he's like a sub, just 3rd down linebacker, I think that's a great role. It's a good trade. If he's the guy, and now, they're beyond Quay Walker and Troy Anderson, a lot of those guys we've talked about.
Right.
Then, I know that I love him in that spot, but he's a good player to add. I think I got him for relatively nothing. I'm not mad at the trade, but I'm not willing to say they're done adding at linebacker either because of it.
Oh, no, definitely not. But I do think that there's some interesting tea leaves to read with the way that their linebacker room is shaping up. And this is really more so to me about what schematic changes we could be seeing with the Patriots defense moving forward than actually an indication that Mack Wilson himself is going to be a big time player for the Patriots. Like I'm not as caught up in the player. His tape was okay. I think it lacks juice. It lacks punch when you watch him play. He's often where he's supposed to be. He makes plays when he's around the football, and when he's targeted in coverage, he plays pretty well in coverage. He can carry tight ends down the field vertically and be able to stay attached to them up the field. But I think the biggest thing that you lack with his tape is real big time splash plays. Like you had to comb through. I come through 5 or 6 games from him from the last 2 seasons to find some plays to really exemplify the type of guy that I think that he could bring to the table, because the casual fan isn't going to just look at, oh, look at him carry number 3 vertical here. This is so cool, right? Like it's not really as aesthetically pleasing as a pass breakup or a tackle for loss or something like that. The other thing that the Patriots are focused on, he was as much as the Browns defense was terrible that day, he was probably the best Browns defender on the field in that game in Foxborough last season. And the Patriots watched the tape from that game back and said, oh, well, this linebacker 51 had a decent game, right? Like he was kind of a problem for us. So that's a guy that I think that they've been over in the draft before, obviously being a Bama guy in 2019. And then again, this season scouting Cleveland and then reviewing the Cleveland game. They've probably seen a decent amount of Mack. Now, the other thing that I wonder, though, to go back to the schematic changes.
Well, a couple more things I want to add on Mack Wilson before we wrap it up. I've had a lot of people ask me, all right, he's a successful Alabama linebacker. Why'd he go in the 5th round? He only stayed in college for 3 years. Saban tried to talk him into coming back. If he stays another year, he's probably a top 100 pick. He came out very raw. And again, that's another thing where the Patriots coaching staff has had success with this. He came right into the NFL. He may not, it's the Cleveland Browns. They probably didn't develop him right. He's been in a bad coaching spot for a while. They might be able to round him out in a way a team like the Browns wasn't. The other thing, and I'm trying to look it up because we know they have a history of this, they will look at, and this ties into that point, they will go back and look at the high school rankings. They will go back and look at high school tape and see, okay, what top ranked high school players didn't pan out? And is it because they weren't coached right in college, right? Is there talent here that the college didn't? Now, that wouldn't happen necessarily at Alabama, or it could be something like, was he not coached right when he got in the NFL? They did that J.C. Jackson's a prime example. J.C. Jackson was the number 1 recruit in his class. Obviously, there's extenuating circumstances as to why he wasn't drafted, but he's an example. I'm trying to think of the other ones. There's some other guys further down the roster. Byron Cowart was the top recruit in his class, got absolutely ruined by Auburn. I believe he came out and said he regretted going to Auburn. So here it is. Mack Wilson, the 2016 recruiting class, 34th overall recruit in the class. That was a pretty good class. I mean, I'm scrolling down here. Some of the guys he's ahead of: Miles Sanders, Devin Asiasi was a high school recruit. Mecole Hartman was 48th in that class. Tyree Cleveland, 52nd. I'm not going to sit here and make people listen to me read the whole list, but the point is, he checks a lot of boxes for what they look for in that diamond in the rough, right? He's every example of, there's something we can do that his previous team couldn't do for him. And we'll do it, and we'll fix him, and we'll turn him into a player. Like, that is, I think, the draw in Mack Wilson.
Yeah, and he's somebody that can definitely cover. He's a much more athletic linebacker than what they had in Bentley and Hightower. I wouldn't necessarily call him a sideline to sideline player in terms of his run pursuit, but he can definitely.
I mean, by their standards, he is.
Yeah, for sure. He can definitely carry guys down the field, though. That's the point, right? If you have a tight end in the slot or in the number 3 spot in line, he's running a seam, he's running some sort of vertical, and a guy like Mack Wilson can carry him up the field. And that's not something that they've really had at that linebacker spot for a while. Honestly, a lot of his profile reminds me a little bit of Raekwon McMillan's, right? A similar core special teams guy. So they seem to kind of be doubling up on that sort of thing. But back to the kind of schematic changes. So the Patriots right now don't have a single linebacker on their roster listed over 245 pounds, unless you want to count Anthony Jennings as a linebacker. But I count him as an edge player, outside linebacker, not an inside guy.
He can play the middle. He played the middle a little bit at Alabama.
He's a big dude. I think they see him as more of an edge guy, but regardless, semantics. They typically are up over 250 pounds with their inside linebackers. The biggest reason why is that they played that 3-4 odd front, an Okie front, where they don't cover the guards with players on the line of scrimmage. So there's bubbles over the guards or openings over the guards. If you're going to uncover the guards in an odd front, you can't have 235-pound linebackers because those guards are going to fit up to the second level. They're going to pull. They're going to lead block up to the second level at the linebackers. And that's when you need to have your Dante Hightowers and your Jawan Bentleys come and bring the sledgehammer, right? Because got a 235-pound guy trying to meet a guard at the point of attack. It's not going to end well for the linebacker most of the time. So if the Patriots are going this direction with these faster, smaller Mack Wilson type linebackers, then playing the odd front is not what they're going to be doing next year. So this could definitely be an indication. Now, I know I'm reading a lot into one move. So let's see what happens with the rest of their linebacker moves and what they do the rest of free agency, then obviously in the draft. But they could be moving to more of an even front team. They could also potentially be moving to more zone. And that's why they're getting faster and smaller at linebacker so that their linebackers can handle more zone coverage. That's the type of thing that I think we need to continue to look for and see if are the Patriots moving in a different direction with the way that they're going to play defense. No J.C. Jackson, the back end, the shadow number ones. They're getting smaller at linebacker. I think Christian Barmore's at his best is a 3 technique. So you go even front, you can play him more at the 3 technique. Those are the types of things that I'm interested to see if this is kind of the precursor to the fact that they're going to dip into the draft and get a little bit smaller at linebacker. Now, they could re-sign a guy like Bentley. They could go after some of the bigger backers in the draft, and none of this will ever even matter. But that's where I'm at with the potential here, especially after what Gerard Mayo said during Super Bowl week, that they want to get faster. They want to get more athletic. They want to get more playmakers at the second level. If they're going to do all those types of things, then they need to play even fronts because they're not going to be able to put 235-pound linebackers in that 3-4. Those guys are just going to get run over.
And maybe they want to mix. I've talked about this before, trying to find some hybrid between what they like to do and adjusting it to the more modern game. What is Miles Jack officially released? I saw Miles Jack's name on Twitter. Skip the beat. It could be some sort of mix, but they're definitely getting smaller at linebacker. The one thing that's surprising, everybody's been pointing out the size of those guys, and I think that's a fair point. I would just add to that, it's also a very, very young group.
Yeah.
And beyond youth, a lot of guys who haven't played a ton in the NFL. That's not necessarily a bad, I don't mean that as a bad thing. That's generally a position where Bill Belichick values veterans. He values NFL experience. He values age, right? We've seen that over the last few years. So It's just a bit jarring to see how young that group is all of a sudden. We remember in 2020, they only had 3 guys with NFL experience. Juwan Bentley was the oldest player in the group. So they've done it before, but they had a massive overcorrection after that, right? They bring in Kyle Van Noy. They bring in Matthew Judon. They bring back Dante Hightower, Jamie Collins, right? So as much as the size, the age stands out to me as well, just to point that out.
Yeah, I think that those are the two things really that there is to point out about this. Are they going to more even fronts? Are they going to more zone? Are they going to continue to stay young at linebacker? Those are the types of things that we'll continue to monitor here. Quickly, pour one out for Chase Winovich. I don't think anybody's actually surprised that the Patriots moved on here from Chase Winovich. But if you could point to one thing about the Chase Winovich experience, Alex, why didn't it work? Because the first 2 seasons in the NFL, he has 11 sacks. He's a pretty productive player, especially as a rookie. It seemed like he was going to be a part of the solution moving forward on defense and the next wave of front 7 defenders for New England. Then he plays that game against Baltimore. I'll never forget that one where he's playing inside linebacker, and he's actually looks like a pretty good player there as well. He can play football. There's no doubt about it that Chase Winovich is an NFL player, but it didn't work here. What's the biggest reason why in your mind?
By the way, I think the comp picks just came out. Discipline, right? Not off the field stuff, rush discipline. They want somebody who's going to set the edge, who's not going to allow the quarterback to break contain, unless you're Matthew Judon or Chandler Jones and you have elite makeup speed. And yes, makeup speed is a thing for pass rushers, not just corners. Unless you have elite makeup speed as pass rusher, they would rather you be disciplined, push the pocket, not allow the quarterback get outside and be able to defend against the run if that's needed. We've heard it said before, they view an incomplete pass and a sack as equal, right?
Right.
As long as it's not a positive play, it doesn't need to be a negative play. If the quarterback throws the ball away, they lose the down, they don't gain any yards and move on. So I just don't think that was Winovich's game. I think maybe they thought, they saw the pass rush potential and it's there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being a decent player in Cleveland or wherever he ends up long-term. Because some teams like their pass rushers to do that more, and some teams are built better to handle that. The Patriots aren't, right? When you're generally bringing your linebackers downhill, if you're in zone, you have more eyes watching the quarterback, you can be more aggressive. That's obviously not the case in New England, or it hasn't been the case in New England. I think they thought they could teach him to be more disciplined while still having him be the kind of pass rusher he showed he could be, and either they couldn't, or he just didn't pick up on it, or whatever. But I think that's ultimately the disconnect there.
Yeah, I think that schematically or football wise, that was definitely it. He was a bit of an oddball though, too. Right. And I think he talked too much for them, quite frankly. I just don't think that it was much of a culture fit either for really either side. And I'm not saying that was ultimately the bigger reason why. I think the bigger reason why is what you hit on. But I do think it is worth mentioning that from a culture standpoint, I don't think that he was really the type of guy, their flavor, their cup of tea. And I think that was part of it as well to a degree, because he was rolling in the 2019 season at one point and they pulled him back. Remember, they benched him for a while. So something went on there in terms of some of his radio interviews and some of his meetings with us in the media and those types of things. But yeah, for the most part, it was the fact that he couldn't set the edge, right? And he just wasn't their type of edge setter, their type of rusher on the edge at outside linebacker. So Chase Winovich and Mack Wilson, there's that trade. The Patriots also today brought back James White on a 2-year deal, pretty affordable contract for the team. I put this stat out there right after they announced that they had re-signed James White, that taking his first 2 games from last year, he was on pace for over 100 catches last year. He was going to have a monster year with Mac Jones, as Mac Jones is a safety valve, just like he was for Tom Brady. So I think if James White can get back to full speed, obviously it's not the number one weapon that we all want and are clamoring for, but that's a really positive outcome for the Patriots if James White is the same guy.
Yeah, I had my notes here. Let me pull these over. For the last 5 years, James White's been first or second on the team in catches. You tweeted this out earlier. He would have had over 100 catches last year if he stayed on his pace before he got hurt. Important player in the Patriots offense. They missed him. And I know people don't want to hear this, and it's not entirely the answer, but this is a weapon Mac Jones didn't have last year that he will now have. Brandon Bolden did an admirable job. What's the word? Not admiral. Brandon Bolden did a decent job filling in.
Admirable job. Yes, I know what you're
whatever it is. It's not football. Brandon Bolden did a decent job filling in. He's not James White. That's the reality of it. Since James White took an active role in the offense in 2015, he redshirted his rookie year. Since he took an active role in the offense in 2015, he's second in the league in receptions among running backs, second in the league in receiving yards. He's third in both of those categories, but the only other back with at least 300 catches, 2,500 yards, and 20 or more touchdowns in that span, in addition to James White, is Alvin Kamara. The guy is a playmaker on offense. Getting hit, we'll see, how he looks physically. It sounds like he's doing well coming off that hip injury. If he's in good shape, right? Having him back for Mac Jones, that's going to be a big deal. That's going to make a difference. Doesn't mean they're done adding on offense. Doesn't mean they couldn't use another wide receiver, but he will help them. He'll definitely help.
So I think the one thing that, I think Brandon Bolden, like you said, he did a really nice job filling in for James White. And there were certain routes that Brandon Bolden ran that were, on James White's level. Like, I thought that Brandon Bolden was a really good wheel route runner last year coming out of the backfield. As a screen back, he had some good plays with the football in his hands on screens and misdirection plays, but he didn't have that ability, that short area agility to get open in a one-on-one matchup like James White can, right? He doesn't have that shiftiness or that one-on-one ability. And the Patriots are so good, especially backside, of getting a linebacker on James White and getting that mismatch and being able to have James White just go to work on that option route coming out of the backfield. And Bolden was not really that type of guy, right? He just wasn't that. Right. He's not shifty at the top of the route like James White is. That is such a really useful tool for the Patriots and obviously for Mack. And I think that that's going to be a big thing to have him back as well. A couple of other things that happened while we were sleeping, probably for a lot of us, but off the air yesterday. Big Kick Nick back for 2 more years. The Patriots Inc. Nick Folk. This one also sounds like a slam dunk for New England. Didn't cost them a ton, didn't break the bank, and one of the most consistent kickers in the league over the last couple of years.
Yeah, he's been excellent and no-brainer. Didn't want to dip into the kicking market. What did Young Wei Koo get from the Falcons today? He got big money. Yeah. Big money. He's one of the few guys who's arguably been better than Folk over the last few years. So they get him back for 2 years. I don't think Quinn Nordin was going to be the guy. He was very fascinating last year, certainly, but his accuracy was still a question. That's not something you can just snap your fingers and fix, right? So, yeah, this was a no-brainer. Good, affordable deal. No reason to be upset about this one.
Yep. So that pretty much sums up where we're at now with the Patriots. I can rattle it off really quickly here. They've re-signed Devin McCourty, Matthew Slater, Brian Hoyer, James Ferentz, Nick Folk, and James White. They have traded for Mack Wilson. They have tendered Jacoby Myers, and they have lost Kyle Van Noy, Ted Karras, J.C. Jackson, Chase Winovich, and now Shaq Mason. Obviously, they've lost a lot. It's still early on. I want to circle back to the Shaq Mason trade before we sign off here. And I think the biggest thing for me, now that I've had some time to dwell on it even more and think about this, what my curiosity with these types of moves and the way that they handle their cap is, how much does real dollars actually come into play here, right? I'm not talking about cap space. I'm not talking about what we see on Over the Cap or Spot Track or whatever. I'm talking about real money, because the only explanation for why the Patriots don't like borrowing from the future, at any rate, really, I don't buy the whole thing like they don't want to increase cap hits in future years. Like, I think that that's easily manipulated and easily avoidable, especially with the way that the cap is going up. In order to make those types of conversions happen, then Robert Kraft has to sign a big fat check to Matthew Judon, right? That's to me where I'm wondering here is real cash such a big factor in the way that they do things that they're not willing to make these restructures happen, and they're not willing to borrow from future seasons, to the point now where they've Kyle Van Noy, I take it or leave it, but he was a solid player for them last year. And then now they're trading Shaq Mason for a 5th-round pick just to free up cap space that they could have done in a multitude of other ways. And I get you don't want to be the New Orleans Saints. You don't want to get stuck in a position where you're $90 million over the cap because you've done this so many times with the salary cap conversions that doesn't work out. But they could have converted Judon's salary. They could have converted Jalen Mills' salary, and this isn't going to break the bank in future seasons. What I don't understand about this move is why was Shaq Mason the domino? Like, why was that the box that needed to be checked when they could have done this in a multitude of other ways to free up the same amount of cap space?
And I guess I'll say what I said yesterday. I'll echo what I said yesterday after the J.C. Jackson news, right? This is half the equation. When we talk about the Shaq Mason trade, it's half the equation. The other half is what do they do with it? Who do they get to replace him? What do they do with that pick? Like I looked this up because it's a similar trade. And I mentioned it earlier when they traded Logan Mankins, right, in 2014. That was not a popular move at the time. It was not a popular move at the time, but they got a 4th-round pick back. They got Tim Wright back. They went on to win the Super Bowl that year. With that 4th-round pick, they took Trey Flowers. They had a 2nd 4th-round pick that year that was freed up because they had that pick to take Flowers. With that 4th-round pick, they took Shaq Mason. Those picks, were in 2015. They traded Mankins in 14. They were 15 picks. But the point being, so you go back and you look at that. Well, that was the year they brought in Brian Waters, right? Or am I remembering that incorrectly?
Brian Waters was 2011, wasn't he?
Was he? Somebody played guard. I don't know. They clearly had I can't remember who it was, but they clearly had a capable guard in 2014. They won the Super Bowl. They found a replacement. They used the pick. They turned the pick into a player. Ultimately, it worked out. Are they going to, am I saying they're going to do that this time and it's fine? No. It's half the equation. We need to see, impressive. I remember it. I clearly don't remember it. We need to see we need to have the whole picture before we decide if this is a good trade or not. But it's a lot of these, they're creating a lot of these trees, a lot of these branches where it can go one way or the other, right? They're creating it, and you don't want those. You want to just know what direction you're going and be on the path and feel good about it. Suddenly now there's, the J.C. Jackson thing, that's branching out. Now the Shaq Mason thing. Now there's decisions they have to make here in this and that, and this and that. You don't want as many of those as possible. It's not saying they can't handle them, but you want to limit those situations. Now the Patriots have a ton of them. I'm trying to see who the starting guard was in 2014 because it's going to bug me now.
It just makes I'm struggling to figure out what their reluctance is so much from just doing a few of those cap maneuvers. Like, it's not like we're saying, oh, let's free up $60 million in cap space by converting everybody's salary and extending and pushing everything out to future years. But if you want $6.5 million in cap space to go and do something, then converting one guy, they've done it in the past, right? Like when they had Brady, they did it in the past. They did it with Brady a couple of times. They did it with Stephon Gilmore. They did it with Marcus Cannon. They did it with a bunch of guys. So it's not like they haven't done it in the past, but they just haven't gone all in at any means of that strategy. And now they seem super reluctant to do it, to the point where they've parted ways with 2 solid starters from last season instead of just finagling the cap in a different way. Again, I'm not that, emotionally upset that they let Kyle Van Noy go from a football perspective. Like, I think that they can replace a player like Kyle Van Noy, but this Shaq Mason thing, I think, is just, I don't know. It just kind of makes no sense to me. And the return makes no sense either.
It's more about the return for me. By the way, it was they moved Ryan Wendell from center out to guard to replace Mankins and drafted Brian Stork, the Remington winner, who center of the year in college football. So, they didn't take Stork here. I go again, not remembering. They didn't take Stork high. I believe it was a 4th-round pick they used on Brian Stork. If that, it might have been lower. So there's ways around that, right? If they go in the draft and they hit on a day 3 pick on a guard and that guy's a starter, well, then, okay, then this trade looks all right. You freed up cap space and it was a 4th-round pick, Stork. Like you said, they freed up cap space. If they go get Leo Collins, they've got their long-term right tackle. You made the seamless switch at guard. Like, great. Like, that would work. There's a lot of ifs there. You got to figure it all out. So it's more things now. The to-do list keeps getting longer and longer. It can all be accomplished, but each step you add makes it that much harder to do the rest of them. And they keep adding steps to that list.
Yeah. The other thing too about this, and this starts a couple years ago. This is another one of those trades where I think everybody's scratching their heads like, how did they only get a 5th round pick back for that guy? Like last year it was Stephon Gilmore for a 6th. This all started with Jimmy G, right? Jimmy G for the 2nd was the big one back then. But we have Stephon Gilmore for a 6th, Shaq Mason for a 5th. Who are like, is this truly what these guys' markets are? Or are they, what are they doing with these trades? Also, I think is a really interesting question because it feels like a lot of people around the league, when they react to these types of things post trade, and I'm not just talking about media, I'm talking about agents and people that I speak to in the league, they all come back to me and they're like, we figured they probably could have done a little bit better there. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying that they could have gotten a 1st round pick for Shaq Mason, but all of us, when we saw 5th round pick for Shaq Mason, we're like, what the heck? You know, how's that all that you get for one of the top 5-6 guards in football, and you're getting a 5th round pick back for him? It's also not a contract. Like Amari Cooper got a 5th round pick back for Dallas because he had $20 million due for him this year, right? Shaq Mason didn't have $20 million due for him next year. It's just really also a tough pill to swallow in a part of this. And I think everybody that wants the big move in free agency, that wants the wide receiver, that wants them to make one of these splash signings or trades or whatever the case may be, the only way that they're going to be able to go out and do that is if they start borrowing from future years. And they seem super reluctant to do that. These deals like Shaq Mason getting shipped off for a 5th round pick, like, yeah, they could use that money to go and do something, but they also just need operating costs. Like they were starting to get tight up against the cap because of the guys that they were bringing in. You know, so that this move to me doesn't necessarily mean that some Allen Robinson sized domino is about to fall. It means that something's going to happen. They're using the space for something. But again, I just have a really tough time when you start to line up all these trades and the returns that they've gotten out of some of these trades recently. All of it just doesn't add up to me. Like, this just, it continues to happen. Like it continues to happen that they keep on making these trades and everybody's perplexed by what they're doing. And this comes off the heels at the combine too, of everybody being perplexed about their coaching staff. Like, so everybody's just kind of perplexed about everything that's going on here at this point.
Yeah, it does. It does kind of feel that way, you know, and it's once again, it's tough because we have no idea what the final picture is going to be. We don't know what it's going to look like. We're months away.
Yeah.
That being said, we said that when the coaching staff kind of fell apart, and then we found out, well, no, this is what the final picture is going to be. This is it. They're not going to do that with the roster. They're not. Like they literally have to add players. They don't have enough players to field the team right now. But again, I'll go back to it. The to-do list is so long at this point. It feels hard to comprehend what this thing's going to look like on the other side because they have so much work to do. And the assets they have at their disposal, is it enough to get done everything they need to do? I think it is. I think it'll be very close. I think a couple things have to go their way. I think they might have to get creative. I think they can do it. Like I sent you, my buddy texted me, he's freaking out, like needed to change his pants. He's so worried about the team. And I texted him like a 10-step list of what they can do. This was before the Mason trade. So now I guess it's a longer list. But like, again, a couple things got to go their way. Doesn't feel unrealistic that they can get there, but man, that list keeps getting longer and longer. And it's, you know, at a certain point, you're going to have to start crossing out steps and just saying, oh, we don't have it in us to accomplish that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I think that I'm way too early to have this kind of meltdown too on air. So I'll admit we're still way too early in this process. And that's important context to really hammer home and keep us all a little bit relaxed here. But I think it's exactly what you just said. It's that, and I'll go back to what I said at the beginning of the show, they're taking on water at this point, right? Like if they had gone through this offseason and they had just stayed afloat of where they were last year, and then you add a draft class on top of what they were able to accomplish last year, and you keep progressing that way, then I think that would be optimistic. Like I would be optimistic about that. If they brought back all their guys, even if they didn't bring back JC, but if they brought back all their guys, they had a good draft and they just kept the train rolling and didn't really create so much, you know, kind of uncertainty and holes on their roster. But now you look at this roster, they need corners. They need offensive linemen. They need a wide receiver. They need linebackers, or even just front seven players in general. There's a lot of boxes to check, and now the list just keeps getting longer and longer. And even with Shaq Mason being dealt, they only have $14 million in cap space to spend it on veteran guys. They only have 7 picks in the draft. So there's not a whole lot of assets to go around to really attack all of these problems either.
Quick side note here, because I just got like 3 or 4 DMs about it. Let's just clarify. It's completely unrelated, but let's just clarify something.
Yes.
You have not reported the Patriots have shown interest in Brandon Cooks, right?
No. I don't know where this came from.
I'm assuming you saw this too. I got enough DMs about it that I just wanted to say. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss it, because I do space out during the show from time to time, as I'm sure people can tell. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss that one.
So I'm pretty sure that this is like a troll account that I'm now feeding into that has.
I don't feed into it, but
there's some reason it's called My Patriots Updates, which I'm sure is a play on Ari's account, My Sports Updates, right?
It's actually Bill Belichick's burner.
Right. He's just pissed off.
Right. He's putting it all out there. Yeah. I just want to, because again, I'm all in on Brandon. Like, if they trade for Brandon Cooks, if they flip this 5th round pick, because, they got for Shaq Mason for Brandon Cooks, that I might be okay with that. And then they go and they get a guard in the draft, and
I don't know who this person is. I have nothing to do with this person. All of a sudden, he's telling me things that I'm reporting that I'm not actually reporting. So
there you go.
No, I have not reported that. The only thing I have reported about the wide receiver market is that the Patriots are still making calls about wide receivers. That is it. I have not reported any names. I've not reported anything about Allen Robinson. And we'll see what happens with the Patriots and wide receivers. But we need to.
Do you have any names you want to give us?
No, not right now. Maybe tomorrow. We'll see.
Well, what are the names? Let's real quick. Let's reset the board here. What are the names? Because you have put names out there.
Yes.
The last couple days.
So MVS is still out there. Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They're definitely interested in him. They've talked to him. They've inquired. His market's getting a little bit wonky too. Like, they're talking about on his camp, $12 million a year as a starting point for his offer. I just don't see that happening. I don't really see the reason for the Patriots to go there. Is MVS a $12 million player? I just
in this market he might be. Overall, I don't know.
I mean, they already have Nelson Aguilar on that contract, though, right? And so I don't know.
What's Aguilar's deal?
His cap hit this year is over $14 million just because they backloaded it like they usually do.
Well, so how much would they save if they moved him?
If they traded Aguilar, they would save about $10 million in cap. If they cut Aguilar, it's like 4 and change.
So, like, because I'm saying, like, hypothetically here, right?
Yeah.
Is MVS worth $12 million? I don't know. MVS for $12 million, and then you move Aguilar for a pick? That might be a net positive. That might be a net positive.
What's the pick you're getting back for Aguilar? I think the biggest thing is heading into the
case is worth a fifth. I don't know, but
probably nothing. Like, you probably have to pick swap it just to get out of Nelson Aguilar at this point, based off of Amari Cooper for a 5th and Shaq for a 5th. Like, this trade market's just not great. I think the biggest thing that you look at, though, is I think they were content with making a lateral move at X if they could get better value on the contract, right? Like, they wanted to swing big. I think they still are on the purview of Allen Robinson's market. I'm just kind of going off of what I've heard. That's not anything completely solidified, but I think they wanted to swing big on a guy like Allen Robinson. It hasn't come to fruition yet in terms of his market. They don't know where that direction. No one really knows what Allen Robinson's doing or thinking right now. That camp has been super quiet this entire time. So with Allen Robinson, we're still waiting on that. They've kicked the tires on guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They've kicked the tires on guys like Deshaun Hamilton and Jakeem Grant. Those are the types of players that they've reached out to a little bit. They reached out to Cedric Wilson initially, but they bowed out of that quickly when they saw the money that Miami was giving him. They have talked to Travis Benjamin a little bit. So those are some of the guys that I'm hearing that they've at least inquired on. They're inquiring it on a decent amount of players, Alex, that can return kicks as well, which I think points to Gunner's situation. So
Gunnar doesn't return kicks. Gunnar only returns punts.
He returned kicks a little bit last year, but yeah,
well, I'm saying can't isn't like he doesn't. He's not good at it.
Yeah. So they are,
yeah.
I think, looking, between Grant. I have heard that they've at least showed some preliminary interest in Travis Benjamin, that they might be in the market for a returner. Deontay Harris in the chat, he got the second round tender. That him and Alan Lazard, I think, are pretty much off the board. They're not going to give up a second round pick for either one of those guys.
So I was going to ask that too. You think they're out on that?
Yeah, I don't think they're giving. Would you give up a second round pick for Alan Lazard? I certainly wouldn't. So
let me ask you this one though, because we know they've talked to some of these slot guys, and it's a good slot draft.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, they both signed their tenders. Would you? And this is just a hypothetical. Like, I don't know if I do this or not. I'm throwing out a hypothetical here. Jacoby Myers also on a second round tender. Would you trade Jacoby Myers for Alan Lazard?
I guess that's a good question. I didn't even really think of that. I don't know. I don't think so.
We know they'll do stuff like that. Like when Welker was tendered, they traded for him. They didn't sign him to the offer sheet. So
right. I think that's the biggest thing, though, is that their school of thought, as far as I know, was okay. If we get a big fish to play on the outside, like Allen Robinson, like Robbie Anderson, someone like that, then we'd like that. We're good with that. But if we're not going to get that and we're going to sign a receiver, then we'd rather get value at that X spot so that once we move on from Nelson Aguilar, we have a cheaper player at that spot. Right. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is that if they sign Marquez Valdes-Scantling, that's not a cheaper player based off of his market right now than Nelson Aguilar. So they're not getting better value on that contract. And I think that's the struggle that they're having right now with this wide receiver market, is that they maybe thought that a guy like MVS was going to come in at like 9 or 10 million, sort of like what they gave Kendrick Bourne last year. And that was going to be a more discount Nelson Aguilar. But now his market, because thanks to the Jaguars and Christian Kirk, has gone absolutely haywire. There's no longer that value field stretcher in this free agency class, unless you go down a couple pegs and you bring back like Damiere Byrd, which I don't think they have any interest in doing. So that's the main thing that I think they're struggling with, that wide receiver, is that essentially now it's like Allen Robinson and backing up the Brinks truck for a guy like Allen Robinson, or signing another contract that has questionable value on it, like for somebody like MVS. And the Patriots, I think, might be out on all of it, to be honest with you, just because of the way that this market is shooken out.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to feel that way. So, well, the good news is we got the comp picks today, so the full draft order is coming, so we can dig into the mock draft soon.
Yeah.
And when I say dig in, I mean dig in.
If you want to reverse engineer it, you can go ahead and figure out the draft order now and figure out.
I don't know, because there's those additional comp picks now for the hiring the minority coach. That's the last thing we don't have. I have zero clue how that works.
Okay. Yeah. Fair
if
enough.
I could reverse engineer it, I would. Trust me. But
so
I'm assuming we'll get it soon.
So believe it or not, tomorrow is actually the start of the league year. The league year hasn't even started yet. We've had a lot of news the first 2 days of the legal tampering period. The league year starts tomorrow on Wednesday. Alex and I will be back on the pod tomorrow night to break down any Patriots news. We'll probably do this again tomorrow night, and then from that point, just go based off of the news and see if there's any breaking or interesting things that we want to talk about, and go from there. But tomorrow we'll do another one of these recap shows about the day in free agency, and same time as tonight, 5:00 on Wednesday, and we'll go from there. But again, the news today breaking right before we hit record: Shaq Mason traded to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a 5th round pick. The Patriots have a lot of work to do. Bill Belichick's got his work cut out for him. He's got a lot of angry people here in New England, I'm sure, that are already clamoring to see what the heck he's going to do to dig out of this hole that they've dug themselves into the first couple of days of free agency. But as Alex walked me back off the plank, there's a long way to go, right? So we'll see what ends up happening here over the next couple weeks and months, and we'll have you covered here on Patriots Beat. So thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll see you guys tomorrow. And until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. We'll see you guys tomorrow night, everybody. Thanks for watching.